Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Manoj Kewalramani, the chairperson of the Indo-Pacific Studies program at the Takshashila institution. And today we have a special conversation with one of the newest members of Takshashila, Kingshuk Saha, who has joined us as part of our Indo-Pacific Studies program, looking at the Quad and developments in the region broadly. Welcome, Kingshuk. Welcome to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Manoj.
So for your debut, I think it's a really fun conversation that we have planned, which is around, the sort of the crowded Indo-Pacific region where we have a new sort of entrant with a new strategy document. And we thought that we'll break down that document and try and understand why is it that Canada is now issuing a Indo-Pacific strategy document. What are its goals? What are its objectives? And what role does it see for India within its conceptualization of the Indo-Pacific's future? So, Kingshuk, let me begin with this question to you. After all these years, now, the Indo-Pacific as a concept has been there for a long time, but, you started to hear, at least from the United States, under the Trump administration, you heard sort of Indo-Pacific becoming a strategic domain and, strategy documents coming out talking about it. Why is it that today in 2022, late 2022, has the Canadian government issued an Indo-Pacific strategy document?
Yeah, so thank you for this opportunity. When we talk about Indo-Pacific, I would like to start with a very old, Charles Dickens quote, this is the best and worst of time. So if you look at the Indo-Pacific at present, it provides a huge opportunities. Like four largest economy are based out of Indo-Pacific. Also, apart from the economic angle, there are the thing that concern most of the people in the world, that is climate change. Any of those things that requires that you have to take into consideration the countries of Indo-Pacific. That is one aspect. Another thing that is in our age that is defining is Indo-Pacific region is a hot spot. There are a number of conflicts going on and emerging conflicts. So now if you see the world in a nutshell, it is through Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific is the place for all the countries to be. I think Canada's have the people, they have realized this after a long time. And now they have come up with their strategy, as in they also say it's a once in a lifetime thing. So this is the reason why they have come up with a strategy on Indo-Pacific.
It's really interesting, right? Because like you said, the document talks about the fact that there is a once in a generation, Canadian response that is needed. You need a generational response to what is essentially a once in a generation global shift that is taking place in the world, which essentially to me sounds like an acknowledgement of the gravity of geoeconomics and geopolitics shifting away from the geopolitical West, which was the United States and Western Europe, towards Asia, predominantly, the Indo-Pacific, which comprises the United States, Canada, and other Pacific countries. And this is an acknowledgement of that shift that is taking place. Like you rightly said, I think the document does talk about a significant amount of, economic role. I mean, just to quote a few figures that I was reading, annual two-way merchandise trade for Canada with Indo-Pacific countries is around $226 billion. It's the entire region, is sort of excluding the US, is the largest trading partner for Canada outside the US, apart from the US. Bilateral sort of investment, two-way investment between Canada and the region is around $64 billion between 2020 and 2022. So it's quite a bit of economic engagement across the region, which includes countries like, ASEAN countries, India, China, and Australia, among others. So it's quite a significant economic footprint that Canada has in this region. So, and like you said, also sustainable development is a key part of it. So that's the sort of opportunity prism. They want to be there, like you said, because Indo-Pacific is the place to be. And the numbers sort of require them to be there. What are the challenges that they see in the region? Because the document does talk about a lot of challenges. So can you sort of in a nutshell tell us what are the challenges that they see?
Yeah. So apart from the opportunities thing, in order to get those opportunity, you need to navigate the challenges. Like when you talk about Indo-Pacific, I think the bull in the China shop would be China. To say to be more specific. So the rise of China, like China has emerged not only as a economic power, but as a military power. And so there is a sense like China has become more assertive. If I may, so more than assertive, it's more like being aggressive. So it has benefited from the existing law, global world order, that is a rule-based system. But now it wants to start its own system whereby it can dominate the other countries in the region. And no country in the region is strong enough on its own right to fight that. Apart from China, the region has number of issues. Like there are the relation between India, Pakistan, both being nuclear country, they have a long unresolved border dispute. So there is frequent skirmishes. Again, there is a dispute in the South China Sea between China and its neighbor. There is a rogue state, North Korea, that keeps the region on its toe. Once in a while, it fires missile. There is a dispute between Japan and China. There is a dispute between China and its South Asian, like with Vietnam, Philippines over South China Sea. Now there is another threat emerging from China's aggressive posture toward Taiwan. So these are some of the challenges we see in this region.
It's truly fascinating that they have actually listed out each of these issues within the document, and we will get into China with in some depth going forward in this conversation. But just for anybody who's not read the document, I think it's really useful to go back and take a look at it. It's very succinct, but it does mention all these different issues, and quite interestingly it talks about the dispute between India and Pakistan and its borders. And it talks about the fact that there are 4 states in the region that possess nuclear weapons: China, India, North Korea, and Pakistan. So it does sort of conceptualize the strategic challenge far more broadly than what we have seen for, say, other countries. Let's say the United States. There's a far different approach that the Canadians seem to have in this context. What's also, I think, interesting in the document is that there's a sort of case being made for Canada as an Indo-Pacific country. I mean, the idea of a Pacific country is quite straightforward. It has a massive Pacific coastline, so it's quite obvious that it's a Pacific country. But to make the case for Canada as an Indo-Pacific country, there's a line in the document which talks about how a significant number of Canadians come from the region today. So Canada's largest diasporas are of Indo-Pacific origin, which again, can be a source of strength, but can also be a source of friction, something that we have seen in Canada's relationship with India in particular, and even in China. Again, we'll talk about China in a bit. Everybody, I think, remembers that engagement between Xi Jinping and Justin Trudeau at the sidelines of the G20 summit in Bali, which got leaked on social media, where you saw them having a very difficult exchange with Xi Jinping sort of expressing his displeasure and scolding Trudeau, and Trudeau holding his ground about the information apparently from a meeting that had been leaked. But before we sort of get to any of the specifics around China and India, my next question to you is, so okay, we've understood that there is a tremendous economic opportunity. There is also a tremendous challenge with regard to security threats, strategic challenges with regard to the rise of China, nuclear weapons and other things, but also with regard to climate change and sustainable development. So what is it that Canada's approach to the Indo-Pacific is? Canada is not necessarily a major military power. It's a significant economic country. It's a significant economic power. But what is its primary approach to the region? What are the kind of interests that it wants to pursue?
Canada is, if you look at the Indo-Pacific region, apart from the emerging like economic opportunities and the threat, there's another angle to it. It's about the basic human development. This region has around 65% of world population, but out of this, around 35% people are below the poverty line. So this is a non-traditional security challenge. This is one area, and Canada has a very long experience in developmental assistance. And They are, I think, one of the world leaders in developmental economics and providing assistance how to come out, help countries with better strategies to come out of that poverty. This is one area whereby Canada want to engage more. Another area, like, Canada is a member of all the leading economic forum from G7 to G20. So now, like, as you rightly pointed out, the economy is shifting toward Asia, but to rephrase it, let's say Indo-Pacific. So Canada would like a rule-based order system where international norms and regulations are respected and adhered to. So this is one major area, like, with changing time, China is emergingly breaking that law, the international norms. There are issue of from copyright to IPR. So Canada need to, on its own, Canada cannot do that. So it need to form an alliance with all the like-minded countries. Another opportunity for in the Indo-Pacific for Canada is to safeguard the some of the values that is cherished in Canada, that is freedom, human rights. So by forming a broader alliance with the country and in this region and setting a norm, and on top of that, like, as you have rightly pointed out, the economic is shifting. So economy is not like is one aspect that govern your whole way of your life. So what would be your standard of living? How you do invest? So Indo-Pacific is a sunrise sector for a lot of Canadian industries. So it provides huge opportunities. Like Indo-Pacific has some of the fastest growing economies. So Canada can provide their expertise and benefit from it. So this is how, like, Indo-Pacific is very key to Canada's overall strategy.
They list out sort of these 5 objectives that they have, and I'll just read out those for people who are interested. Promoting peace, resilience, and security. Second, expand trade, investment, and supply chain resilience. 3, invest in and connect people. 4, build a sustainable and green future. 5, Canada is an active and engaged partner to the Indo-Pacific. In terms of some of these, I think they do make some commitments, which again we'll have to see how those sort of pan out on the ground, and whether some of these are new commitments or whether there is, the existing engagement will be baked into, to pad up the numbers. But for example, in the first sort of objective, it talks about, Canada will invest in an enhanced military presence along with intelligence and cybersecurity work to promote security in the region. This is really fascinating, right? Because if we've already seen some Canadian sort of naval activity, but I presume this expanded military presence refers to sort of greater presence in the seas around China and the Western Pacific, which, again, presents a likely deeper friction going down the road with China. I think the intelligence cooperation is quite straightforward. Canada is part of the Five Eyes countries, so it is part of that network. But will how the Five Eyes engage with other countries and other like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific will remains to be seen. And again, cybersecurity. Again, I'm not somebody who has tremendous knowledge about Canada's cybersecurity capabilities, but it's an interesting domain that they have specifically highlighted. Because again, I think a lot of has to do with the threat that countries in the region have talked about, from state actors from Russia and China, but also non-state actors within Russia, China, North Korea, and other parts of the world. So it's interesting that is priority number one. Without sort of going into others, but just one other thing that I wanted to point out is that when it talks about priority number 4, which is a sustainable and green future, the document commits that Canada will work with its partners, G7 partners, to meet the $2.1 trillion infrastructure funding gap. One needs to see the money when it comes in, but okay, from an intent point of view, it's good. But also, importantly, it talks about how Canada will share expertise in clean technology, oceans management, energy transition, and climate finance. So again, a lot of this remains to be seen, what is actually delivered. But from a posture point of view, this is useful because it works to sort of address some of the problems of public goods within the Indo-Pacific region, but also, this is mutually beneficial because when you're transferring technology and you're exchanging these sort of skills, when you're empowering other countries, you're also sort of economically gaining from that. So this seems to be like a win-win proposition, depending on, of course, how this process works out. There's also a big sort of people-to-people component in this, which again is useful because a lot of Indians in particular travel Canada to study and to work. So it's quite an interesting aspect of that also, that you will see probably much more focus on providing access or to opportunity in Canada. With that, I want to sort of move to the China specific question, right? You talked about how China is the bull in the room, sort of the elephant in the room is a bull in the China sort of face, so in the China cabinet. So we do see that. So what is the strategy talk about China in specific? How does it characterize a threat from China, and how does it talk about dealing with that threat?
Yeah. So there's two things to it. Like, despite China being a major threat, it still provides a huge economic opportunity. This is something Canada want to engage with. Like, to work on those economic opportunity along with addressing some of the key issues like that is emerging, like, and which comes into conflict with the Canadian value system. So that is democracy, like human rights, rule of law, and some of the issues that Canada's want to be, as per the of this strategy document, they want to talk with their Chinese counterpart and highlight these issues, be it what is happening in Xinjiang or China's aggressive role in South China Sea, for that matter, what is happening in Hong Kong. So as per this strategy paper, like, Canada said, like, you can't ignore, like, or you can't do away from it. You have to engage with them. So while beefing up their military might, it is equally important, like, you engage with them and have more dialogue to overcome, like, what are these, like, issues and like causes of friction. So this is Canada's strategy in dealing with China.
That's so dialogue is one part of the strategy. There is also a whole set of aspects that they talk about uh, to deal with the challenge that they see China is posing. And let me just sort of categorically sort of quote from the document, which in terms of how they talk about the challenge. So when it comes to the international order, they say that, and I quote, China is looking to shape the international order into a more permissive environment for interests and values that increasingly depart from ours, end quote. It's not really saying that China is looking to upend the international order and upend the system, but it is saying that China is looking to create an environment which may not necessarily be in alignment with what Canada sees as its own interests and its own values, and sort of might be suited to Chinese interests and values. Like you said, Kingshuk, it talks about the Hague ruling on the South China Sea and Xinjiang and some of those issues. But when it comes to sort of dealing with China, there are four different levels at which the document talks about things, right? It talks about dealing with China at a domestic level, at a bilateral level, at a regional level, and at a multilateral level. Do you sort of have any thoughts on each of these levels of engagement with China entail?
Yeah. At domestic level, Canada will continue to, strengthen its own defense over its infrastructure, democracy, and informing the citizen against foreign interference. So that is at domestic level what they would be doing. So at bilateral level, they will have one-to-one dialogue with China. Like, what are the Canadians' national interest, like, while remaining to that value, and they will focus on China to, change some of the thing what they are doing. At regional level, like, Canada will balance its approach to China, whereby it will engage the regional partners. So it will diversify, be it investment, and have more dialogue with the regional stakeholders. At multilateral level, it will work with the Quad partners and other partners more closely with China. One of the thing is that you can't isolate China. You need to engage with China. Now, having said that, engage with China is not that they will engage with China and China will also, like, overnight they will agree. It will take time. It will long consume process. So whereby the be it Canada and the partner country need to strengthen their own economy, own defense. So that is
Yeah.
also one thing of that. While they will engage with China at multilateral level, they will make their commitment with the partners more stronger, and they will put forth to China like what are the do's and don'ts.
It's really interesting that, each of these four levels, I presume the primary concern that Ottawa has is with regard to domestic interference, which is essentially what led to that argument between Xi Jinping and Justin Trudeau in Bali, which was around the leakage of information which related to sort of apparent or purported Chinese interference in Canadian domestic politics. And there's been lots of that. And the relationship itself has been extremely difficult, particularly since the case of the arrest and the detention of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. The case has now been thrown out, and all of that is settled. Beijing saw Canada as acting on behest of DC. But you can see that in this particular document, a lot of the focus is on essentially security from a domestic point of view, which is with regard to protecting dealing with investments from state-owned enterprises that may be subsidized or that threaten Canada's national security, specifically related to critical minerals and supply chains, protecting, like you said, IPR and research, those kinds of things. At a sort of bilateral level, I thought the most interesting thing that the document talks about is, with regard to ensuring that Canada enjoys market access in China. So the document says Canada will continue to protect Canadian market access in China while working with clients to diversify within and beyond that market. So you are looking at, despite the friction, despite the uneasiness in the relationship, you are still looking at a relationship where even the Canadian government feels that economic engagement is a net positive and will continue. Even investment will likely continue, despite the objective being to diversify, within and beyond the Chinese market. On the regional and multilateral sort of framework, I thought it was really fascinating that, particularly in the multilateral level, the document says something to the effect of, how we will deal with other issues of economic coercion. But it says that where our interest laps, Canada will partner with China multilaterally, as Canada is doing by co-hosting the 15th Conference of Parties to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal. So there are areas in which it does see congruence, predominantly economic and in terms of broader issues that may impact both countries, such as climate change and things like that. And there you want to engage with each other. The challenge for most countries who've had this approach, even Australia, even the United States has in some ways articulated this sort of an approach, although with much sharper competition edge, is whether China will want to engage with them, because the Chinese argument, particularly to the Americans, has essentially been that you can't pick and choose. You can't confront us in such a manner and expect cooperation from us where you need it, which I think is, it's an interesting argument. And the Chinese have so far, by and large, adhered to that. Although, again, we've seen some degree of back and forth, and particularly after Bali, there seems to be at least some effort to make sure that in areas where one can work together, one works together. If you can think of Xi Jinping's commitment to nuclear weapons use and non-use of nuclear weapons in the Russia-Ukraine conflict is a concession in that direction. I mean, I think that that's something interesting to watch out for, whether Canada will be any more successful than others in walking this tightrope with Beijing. My final sort of question to you is around India. There has been some discussion with regard to this document in India, particularly because the India-Canada relationship has been extremely difficult in the recent past. There's been lots of issues with regard to, what are Khalistani elements in Canada. There's been lots of concern with regard to the personal equation, particularly when Justin Trudeau had visited India a few years ago. And there is lots of friction with regard to apparently a referendum on Khalistan and things like that. So how does Canada view its relationship with India within the context of its broader Indo-Pacific strategy?
So, if you see the strategy document, they've devoted a section on India. And if you see, Indian present context, just recently, Standard & Poor and Morgan Stanley report has come out. They said by 2027, India would be the third largest economy. So by 2031, the GDP from 3.51 trillion, it will double. So there are huge opportunities that is India, which even Canada acknowledges. That is one of the economic aspect. As you said, 1 in 5 diaspora people in Canada are from Indo-Pacific. A good number of them are from India. And as we are talking about diaspora, one interesting fact is that the maximum number of international students who study in Canada, they are from India. So India and Canada has a long history. Like both of them share the same basic value system of democracy, rule of law, more or less same set of Westminster style of government. Both are a multicultural society. So there's a lot in common between these two countries. And when you talk about Indo-Pacific, like without India being the center, like it's very difficult to even think about Indo-Pacific. So in this policy, India has to be there. And India for Canada provides a huge opportunities. India is the fastest growing major economy in the world while other economies are slowing down. So it provides huge opportunity. Recently, the OPEC in its World Oil book reports that by 2040, like India's oil energy demand would double. So it again, like it provides huge opportunities for Canadian energy companies because the way things are going on, be it Russia, be it Iran, both of them are being hit by sanction. It would be with emerging time, it would be difficult for India to get energy from these countries. So it will provide huge opportunities for Canadian companies. Like as Canada is a world leader in sustainable development and they have infrastructure company, and India is going through an infrastructure boom, it will provide a huge opportunity in that sector also. Having talked about the economic aspect, when we talk about the strategic thing in Indo-Pacific, like so, Indian Navy is key in safeguarding some of the major sea lanes, be it from the Gulf of Eden to like Gulf in the Malacca Strait. So this is one area like both this like Canada and India can cooperate to mutual benefit. Like in safeguarding the sea lane, like this is the Indo-Pacific sea lanes has over I think 80% of world trade going through. Some of the major like energy lanes are here. So this is one area. Another would be is the people to people connect. There is a Canadian diaspora in Indian diaspora in Canada. So like, but as you have rightly pointed out, there are some like everything is not rosy. There are some thorn in this rose. So like Canada need to take into India's concerns about the rising issue of this Khalistan thing. Recently there was a referendum. So all those things, and there's an increasing apart from this Khalistani element, like there are gangsters from Punjab forming a base there, all this mafia. So that need to be tackled. So Canada need to be far more sensitive about Indians' concern than looking for their own domestic politics. So this is something.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really it's fascinating again that the document talks about deepening economic ties with India, building resilient supply chains, possibly concluding an expanded market access agreement through an early progress trade agreement or a comprehensive economic partnership agreement eventually, boosting visa capacity for people to people connectivity in Delhi and Chandigarh, supporting academic, cultural, youth exchanges, and so on and so forth, and also working together on climate change. It talks about all of this, but the fact is that the relationship between India and Canada has been really frosty in the last few years. I was recently reading, comments by the Indian High Commissioner to Canada, who's recently taken charge, Mr. Sanjay Kumar Verma. And again, he talks about the fact that, look, it's really important that there is a lot of illegal channels of funding that's taking place, being used by Canadians of Indian origin who are funding the sort of Khalistani cause, which is essentially a separatist cause. And I think to get the point across, he also makes the argument that this is interference in India's internal affairs. And I think he makes a comparison of, that India would not have supported Quebec separatism in Canada. So, and that's how India's view on this is. And again, this is not something that is a long simmering problem in India, and it's led to tremendous challenges in the 80s in particular. So Delhi's sort of sensitivity to this is completely understandable. But again, like you said, there's a domestic political angle in India, right? Canada is home to around nearly 800,000 Sikhs, or at least individuals who believe that Sikhism is their religion. That's about 2% of the population of the country. So it's small, but it's influential, and we've seen that diversity in Canadian politics has been key part of it. So it's going to be tricky for them to sort of try and placate the domestic constituencies, but also address what is clearly a non-negotiable issue from India's point of view. So if Canada wants to have India as a key part of its strategy in the Indo-Pacific and it wants to sort of work with India, this is a sensitive political issue which they will have to address much more meaningfully than has been done so far. Any last thoughts, Kingshuk, before we wrap up?
I think, it's more like walk the talk for Canada. Like when you see a strategic document, as you have rightly pointed out, there will be very good policy points and all. All's depend upon when you see how much is there's a fructification in the ground. So another point, as you said, in specific to India, they need to address this concern because opportunity is huge for both countries. Mutually, it is very beneficial. So these are very small issues that Canada need to address, but they're small but very pertinent from India's point of view.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kingshuk. Thanks for this conversation. And we hope that you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do give us a shout out and share the episode on social media, or you can write to us on our email IDs and social media handles. Thank you so much for listening, folks.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, IVMPodcasts.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.